Live from the New Scientist Labs, it's Janine Young with Wammo on Kiwi.
Yes, New Scientist Laboratories in Melbourne, Australia. Janine Young's with us this morning. Morning, Janine.
Good morning, Wammo.
Now, this first topic might disappoint a few people if they've got high IQs, because they reckon that perhaps you're not all that smart if you do have an high IQ.
Yeah, see, I thought they were talking about me in this study because even last week, my darling partner David turned to me after I'd talked about some misadventure during the day and gone, you know, for a smart girl, you're really dumb sometimes. And instead of getting upset, I went, actually, he's probably right. I thought it was intellectual laziness, but it would appear that in this case, there's actually a whole bunch of other skills that IQ doesn't measure. And they can kind of be the real-world type of things that people need to use. Another perfect example of how you can have a very high IQ, but not be particularly smart, here's George Bush. Everybody goes back to him. He's such an easy option to go to, but his IQ was 120.
Was it? Really?
Yes. And even, you know, some of his most loyal staff and other congressmen in the Republican Party have called him, you know, glib, incurious and ill-informed, lacking intellectual depth.
Yeah.
And they're not particularly pleasant words.
No.
It appears that even though you can actually have a lot of intelligence, it's how you use it that's the key. So, if you have the ability to be able to, I don't know, think about a puzzle, for example. If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long will it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets?
Janine, don't ask me these questions.
And see, this is where I'm intellectually lazy. It's like, well, why am I going to bother rationally going through this?
Yeah.
But if I desperately need to, I know I can.
Yeah.
So the answer, by the way, is 5 minutes for everyone who's still early in the morning. Yeah. But in this case, it seems counterintuitive to actually already have the answer there in front of you. But if you actually think about it, you encounter these sorts of problems every day. And without careful reasoning, you can actually get them wrong because our brains use 2 different systems to process information. One's very intuitive and spontaneous, and that's how I tend to spend most of my day, I must admit. And then there's the one that's much more deliberative and reasoned and, if you like, logical.
See, I think people have known this for a wee while, that there's no compensating for for common sense. You've either got it or you don't, and if you don't have common sense, you do appear a little bit dull, a little bit dumb.
Common sense ain't so common. That's actually the really scary thing about it. It's not that IQ people have a better way of looking at anything like that, the smart people, but when they do choose to reason, they actually reason better.
Right.
There's a nice description of the fact that IQ is a little bit like a spotlight. The strength of that spotlight can be a lot stronger if you are smart, if you have a high IQ. But it does depend on where you shine that spotlight.
Yeah.
If you're not shining it on a number of different angles on a problem, the chances are you're still going to get the response to that problem wrong.
Yeah.
And that's when that whole, you're a bit dumb comes in. So it's all about reasoning through problems and actually being able to think through some of the common traps in intuitive thinking. Too many people rely on just their gut and don't actually go searching for evidence or other ideas that are actually going to rationally support the decisions that they make.
See, I can plead total ignorance on where I sit on this because I've never taken an IQ test.
No, neither have I, but I know that I'm not dumb. I'm not stupid. Intellectually, I know that I am, but I don't actually know the number, and frankly, I don't care.
Yeah.
But those who do actually have high IQs doesn't mean that they even get that sort of day-to-day thing right anyway, because there was a survey of Mensa members in Canada in the mid-1980s, and they found that 44% of them believed in astrology, 51% believed in biorhythms, and 56% believed in aliens.
Well, what's wrong with that?
And ultimately, that's probably harmless.
Yeah.
But it means that there's not necessarily rational thinking being applied to some of these problems.
Right.
And that may explain some of the beliefs in...
But almost that assumes that a smart person has no spirituality.
Does believing in aliens mean that you have spirituality?
Well, I'm talking about, believing in, some people would consider believing in any form of God as just like believing in aliens.
Fair enough, yes. We've talked, you and I, about believing in God and the whole predisposition to religion and stuff like that before. If you want to look at it from a rational point of view, there are parts of your brain and a whole bunch of genetic sequences that can predispose you to believing in God, to needing religion in your life and ultimately having that as your basis. Now, I don't think there's anyone who's going to say that you're a worse person for believing in God, because often there's people lead excellent lives and that kind of thing. So irrationality and God is a discussion for another day, I think. But, if it gets... See, I'm a bit illogical here. If it gets you through the day and you aren't hurting anybody and you lead a good life and all that sort of stuff, I actually don't see a problem. I might be a little bit dumb, but I'm not hurting anybody.
If you lead a happy life, that's what it's all about, right?
Well, avoiding foolish decisions is a good thing. I mean, thinking about the long-term consequences of your actions is something that a lot of people don't do. I think short-term gain is something that a lot of people have become very used to, certainly in the last 20, 25 years. Actually thinking about the long-term consequences might change some of your decisions.
I mean, look at it this way. Some of the smartest people in the world were meant to be in charge of the financial system, right?
Absolutely.
And to protect the world from what's just happened over the past year. They're not smart at all.
Well, no, and that's the thing, because you can be incredibly intelligent, but you can really be very dumb.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the analysis of the GFC have found that a lot of emotion came into it and they got swept up through peer pressure. And so you can be really smart, but it doesn't mean that you can avoid a lot of the pressures that are going on around you that are much more intuitive. And there's that thing again. So I think being aware of some of these things that go on, as humans, we have an inclination to be strongly influenced by the way a problem is framed. Yeah. So the way the problem is presented to us. So if you're, for example, aware that you're likely to be able to spend a monetary award if you're told it's a bonus, but if it's framed as a rebate, you're not, then that's going to change the way you spend your money. Most people get their bonus at the end of the year and they go, woo-hoo, but it's not necessarily there for the spending, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So being aware of those sorts of traps to fall in, and it's on page 39 of this week's edition. It's probably a good thing to look at and have a consideration as to how you actually approach problems and what sort of impacts that has for the rest of your life. All
right, well, worth checking out. Janine, finally, space junk. Apparently it's piling up.
It is. There is a huge amount of space junk. They're actually calling it a blizzard of space in lunar orbit at the moment. Hugh Lewis from the University of Southampton in the UK has been taking a look, and his projections are indicating that the number of close encounters between objects in orbit will rise by 50% in the next decade and quadruple by 2059. And as soon as you start having things like satellites running into each other, that can only be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So a quick survey, well, actually a very detailed survey really, has found that there are 19,000 objects in orbit that are 10 centimetres or larger in diameter.
So there was no forward thinking in that. There was no smarts in that, was there?
Well, no. And some attempts to try and make some of this space junk go away have unfortunately gone awry, because in 2007 the Chinese army used a missile to destroy a defunct weather satellite.
That's right.
And unfortunately it just added more debris.
Yeah.
It actually didn't make things better, it actually made it worse.
Yeah.
So they're actually finding that there's about 500,000 smaller objects, so less than 10 centimetres across, that are orbiting Earth. And the thing is that when you're travelling at fairly hefty speeds like you are in space, even a tiny piece of debris hitting you is going to have very large impacts.
They're kind of better to do what they did recently. Well, didn't they bring the space station down into, they crashed it into the Earth? Or some piece of space station, or was the Russian piece or something? That they
deliberately did bring it down, yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Which was probably better than blowing it up or letting it just float around in space.
Well, the problem is that once it's in space, getting it down again when you have no control over it.
Yeah.
Because rockets and the like were dumped in that sort of area and things run into each other, so you have more shards. Once that's happened, you have no control over it.
Yeah.
So they're basically saying that operators should be able to cope if they're able to maintain strong tracking capabilities.
Right, which is
so
very
I've seen a
expensive.
picture that maps all of the shards and all of the satellites and everything that's around the Earth at the moment, and it's really crowded.
Yeah.
It's really busy.
Yeah.
So
It's a freeway out there.
basically, yes, except they're occasionally running into each other.
All right, Janine, thanks so much. Same
My
time next
pleasure.
week. See ya.
Bye.
Janine Young, our New Scientist correspondent. Those stories you'll find in the New Scientist magazine. It'll be coming out next week.